use. Stack pane literally stacks things on top of each other like pancakes. Like, oh, the button was pressed. That is right on top. That doesn't look very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this. Rather than use a stack pane, we're going to vertically align everything. That means we're going to go for a new V box. If you want to do H box, that would horizontally align everything in terms of layout. So now we've got our V box instead. So now we got our V box instead. And that should be really all that we need. It's not yelling at us anymore. We have import javafx.scene.layout.vbox. If I didn't have that, see how it freaks out? So you got to make sure you have that. Before we had stack pane, and that was a pain, how it stacked everything up. Okay, so that alone, if we run this, we're already starting to see how we can control the layout in JavaFX land. Okay, now we're gonna, oh, that's cool. Hey, look. All right, so we can organize things better, but that's not gonna be the major focus of this video. You actually really can control everything. But let's keep going with more buttons, and let's make this far more interesting. Okay, so let's do it like this. Let's have 3 buttons. Now, don't forget all of the things that you've learned before in Java. Like, you've already learned about loops. Let's say I want to make 3 buttons. I make a little for loop here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bunch of buttons. Okay? I'm going to make a bunch of buttons. So now I could be like, make a button in here. And what's going to be interesting is this is going to be button number I. All right. So now that for loop, it's going to make a bunch of buttons. Okay. Now, what I recommend I do as well is, if I want, I could have some large root.getChildren.addAll, and I can keep putting the buttons in here. Or as I generate them, I could just add them. I could just add them right there. I can just add each of those buttons right there. Oh, but what I will have to do is I will have to move my VBox up. Okay, because it didn't know what VBox was yet. Okay, so now I have that root. So now I can start to set up the appropriate layout. And as I make each button, I can just add them. I can even do this programmatically. I could even be like, I'm going to make a bunch of labels. Now instead of buttons, I'm going to go for labels. You know what we'll do too? Don't forget all of the things that you've learned in Java before. Let's actually make an array of labels. We can do these things. We can do everything that we've learned in Java, and we can learn a new tool to do some really cool graphical things. We can learn about JavaFX. All right, so now I got a bunch of labels. I have an array of labels. All right, so that's interesting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually loop through my labels. I will end up adding these eventually, but so let's use my index here. So now I have the ith label in my array of labels. Now what I can do is I can make a new label, and I can call it label number I. So now I'm making a bunch of labels. I'm making buttons. I'm making labels. I can loop through things. I can make an array. And what I can do is I can add this entire. Oh, I can add each one as I go. I can add the ith element to the VBox. So I actually don't even need this. because I'm adding them as I go. So I'll mess with this in a moment, but let's just see all the things that we've made, see how it looks. We're just going to keep adding to this. That's what I'm going to say that 50 million times. We're just going to keep adding things. We're going to keep changing things. Hey, look, everything is vertically aligned. Everything is vertically aligned. So that's kind of interesting. All right, very, very interesting. So now I've got my 3 buttons vertically, hence VBox, V for vertical. And then I've got my 3 labels. Why are the buttons on top of the labels? Well, I added the buttons to the VBox first, so they are going to be vertically aligned. And then I added my labels. So all of the things that you've learned in Java, you can still do. Okay, so let's do something interesting here, though. I'm going to put my labels above. Intentionally, there will be a reason for all this in a moment. Okay, if I put my labels above, well, certainly I need to add everything to the VBox root. I need to add all of the things that I'm creating so that I can actually see them. However, what I can do inside my loop, I don't want to do each button and have its own Lambda function. Why don't I just set on action the event? That's what E stands for, the event E. Let's just do it all at once. Okay, so now for each of these buttons, I'm going to crush a Lambda function here. I'm going to take the ith element, and I'm going to actually get a nice error here, so this will be kind of nice. I'm going to take the ith element, I'm going to set its text, now this is going to be interesting. So here's a little difference. Okay, so here's something a little bit different. Let's see how this works. So whenever you have a Lambda function, you need to have a variable that is final or effectively final. Okay, so you can see that it's yelling at me right here. Copy I to effectively final temp variable? Sure. In a Lambda function, you may only work with final variables. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, we are going to set the text on the label to the button's value. However, we had to have this helper final variable because you may only use variables that are final or effectively final in Lambda functions. So there is that extra little bit of finesse there. Okay, so when a button is pressed, the event that we're going to enact is the ith label. We're going to set its text to which button. Okay, so we now have arrays. We don't just have one label and one button. We made an array of labels. We also made a bunch of buttons. And we set them aligned vertically using VBox. So let's run this. We don't have any errors. Now the labels, we got label 0, label 1, label 2. Press button 0, button 1 was pressed. Press button 1. Button 1 was pressed. That's what that label's telling us. Oh, I'd probably love to go I+1 on this. Do a little bit of math, just so things kind of line up. But so everything that you've learned in Java is still fair game. Oh my goodness. If we want to concatenate this, we got to make sure we're doing the right math here. So now we have button 1, 2, and 3. We also have our labels are off by 1. I'd love for them to be, I don't really want to have label 0 erase or 0 indexed, but it's a little weird. Okay, so again, little things like printing appropriately or messing with strings, they're still super helpful now. So button 1 was pressed, that's going to affect label 1. Button 2 was pressed. Button 3 was pressed. Each button is now affecting its label. Now, let's say you wanted a counter. If ever you're making a class, typically right after you start creating your class, you throw your fields in. We could have a counter started out at 0. And then every time the button is pressed, we could have the counter change. We can really do anything we want. So maybe we'll make one more label. Label L equals new label. Now what we're gonna do, let's I gotta make sure that I add this. I'm gonna add that label at the bottom. So I've created one more label. Now, when any button is pressed, we're going to make a larger Lambda function here. So let's kind of zoom in here. Okay? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to make a big block of code. All right? I'd like to make a large block of code, and I'd like to have multiple things happen in my Lambda function. So to make a code block, we need an open brace. Now, be very, very careful. Our closed brace is going to go here, and then we need a semicolon for setting the text. Now, this is going to look like a weird mess, but what we can do is we can highlight it. I'm on a Mac. I'm going to do Command Option L, and it's going to format this nicely. You see how we have a nice block of code now. So now we can do multiple things inside of our Lambda function. What I'd love to do is when any of my buttons are pressed, I would also like to mess with this new label L. So let's do that. Let's do L.setText. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll call it count label. I don't love L. This is my label for the counter, so we'll give it a meaningful name. I need to add count label. Okay. So now for that label, count label, I'm going to set the text. And I'm going to say the count is now and I'm just going to take my variable called count. But first, after the button's pressed, I'm not going to want to say the count. I'm going to want to increment it first. The count's going to go up by 1, and then we're going to update what the count's label is. Okay? So even maybe when we make the count label, we could do count label dot set text. We could start it out as no clicks have occurred or something like that. So now every time any of my buttons are pressed, we're going to have those specific labels say which button was pressed. We'll also increment our counter, and we're going to update this count label. This count label is going to get incremented every time that someone clicks. Okay, so let's see how this looks. No clicks have occurred. Oh, counts now 1. Counts now 2. So we can have interactivity. We can have specific labels with specific buttons. We could also have one label listening and showing the count for the time any of the buttons is pressed. Okay, so there's lots of different things that you can do here. Um, you can make variables. You can format text. You can do all the things that you've done in Java, and make them a bit more interesting. You're just going to get more and more control. All right, no clicks have occurred. Now the count is incrementing. We could have a variable for each button that we make. We could do that. We could have a corresponding array for each button, and then we could have counters for each of them, and then we'd have the counter for the total. So we can really start to have some interesting interaction. Okay? We can have some interesting interaction. So you can also, like, you can keep making more variables and perhaps using some if statements so that if things are clicked in a certain sequence, there's a certain reaction that happens. Like the sky is the limit. So keep folding in your new skills. Now you can interact more with buttons. You can interact with labels. We can vertically align things, or just for fun, I'll show you HBox. We can horizontally align things. Now see how it yells at us? We don't want to import VBox now. Now we want to import HBox. That's the only change that we made. And now everything can be horizontally aligned in our layout. Okay, well, but so now this looks like crap. So every time you do something, new problems arise. And that's the fun of coding. So if it was 600 by 600 pixels, so that could be enough to facilitate here. So the scene needs to be bigger. Okay, button 1. I guess, this is still kind of junky. So let's see. Let's see how this will affect the shape. Let's make it super duper wide. So you can just keep, so now we're changing the size of the scene so that our HBox has far more room to grow. But what's interesting is it like super resizes. Now that's ugly. So again, each time you see something new, I'm going to show you some new skills, but then we'll generate more and more needs as we go so that we can align things even better. Thanks for watching. More videos to follow. I can't wait to do my weird random circle generator with 4 interesting iterations. Thank you. Have a beautiful day.